So today Sander wants to take us through specifically the kitchen design. And it's because this one was so special to do. It's one of our favorite rooms in the house.
Yeah, well it's a really, really small kitchen. So making sure that you take advantage of every single little piece of space is really crucial to making it feel like you can actually live in here and cook in here. So let's talk about what was here first. First, there used to be a door here and the sink used to be in this place, and there was just this like kind of shitty cabinet here. You know, that's enough for like a little office and make some tea and whatever, but obviously not enough to have just like a normal kitchen to cook in and live in. There's no stove, no fridge, nothing like that. So the first issue that we were dealing with is we just didn't have enough space really to make this corner a proper kitchen. And part of that was because there was just a door opening here that was leading to the bathroom. So that was the first design decision that we made, was to actually close off that door, because what that did was it gave us double the amount of space that a kitchen could potentially be. So then we have this counter and then we have that counter. So kitchens are actually really interesting as far as a design perspective. They're really beautiful. You can go on Pinterest and find all kinds of really beautiful designs. And I think it just like the cabinetry and the geometric aspect of it, all the different textures that are involved with it. Like you have tile, you have like metal for little handles. So there's just all these textures that can go into a kitchen that make it really interesting. So as far as design and layout, usually the stove is kind of centered to the space. So what I wanted to do on this wall, well, this wall was kind of determined already because it had a sink in it already.
The plumbing was there.
The plumbing is there, and I didn't want to move it. One thing that we did do was the plumbing used to be in the exterior wall, and this building wasn't heated in the winter, so they would just drain all the plumbing lines. I tried to get as much of that plumbing to the inside of the wall just to make sure it doesn't freeze, because it does get cold. If you open up a cabinet, you feel it's a little colder in here, if it's cold outside at least. So that's the first thing we did. We knew the sink was going to be here, and I like that place for it.
Well, especially because the sink and the window is usually, have a window over the sink as well.
Yeah, and look at the light that it brings in. It's incredible in the early morning. It really wakes you up when you come in here. Like the bedroom over here is really dark, and then you transition into a kitchen to get some food or tea, and then you're welcomed by all this beautiful light. So I think we didn't have to change anything about that. That was really beautiful already. Then this wall, we really wanted to make the stove the centerpiece in the middle. And then I try to like line up the light here also with the stove. So there's like, that's kind of the middle of the room. And then on the left here is the fridge, which is currently not working because right after we installed it, it decided to just shut off. And the outlet of the fridge is behind the fridge, and there's no real way to get to it. So I'm gonna figure out a way to get the outlet like higher up on the wall so we can actually see if it's plugged in properly. I'm hoping that it's just not plugged in properly, or otherwise we have to like replace it. But
yeah, that was a hard fridge because it's built in. That was hard for both of us to actually get into the
I don't
space.
know, it's actually, it's daunting when you look at it and want to design it, but it's actually not that hard to figure out. There's a really clever system where on the door, you have this like metal shield that just connects to 2 points here, and it has some screws on the bottom, but it allows you to kind of adjust your own door onto door of the actual fridge. And as long as you have it like the correct depth, then it will just close properly. So, and it looks great because it's kind of hidden. And one thing with the appliances for this kitchen, since it's so small, we needed to make sure that every appliance was like 2 feet wide, like 24 inches instead of the 30 or 36 that you would more commonly see. Because if we were to put a 36-inch fridge here, it would just take up all this space, and you feel like you have no counter space left to do anything else.
Yeah, and then also just to show folks, we have more of our appliances in here, so if you need like a toaster oven, things like that, we just don't have it on the countertop, which typically if you had endless countertop space, you would have it on your countertop, but we don't. We have the tea kettle, essentially, and that's like one of the things that we have on the countertop.
Yeah, so then the fridge kind of defines the rest, like the stove and the fridge kind of define where everything is in the kitchen. So then it was just a matter of filling in the rest. And I wanted to make sure that it felt like you had equal space on the left and on the right of this stove. So usually when you do a kitchen, there's all these like standard measurements. And then if there's like a leftover space, they'll use like a filler strip to just fill that empty space. And sometimes you'll need a filler strip to be able to open up a cabinet door or something like that. For example, here, the width is a little more so that this door can actually open and not smash into, the door casing here. So what I did, since I have this computer program, Fusion 360, I was able to measure the space here and actually figure out precisely what my cabinet size needs to be so that here on the left and on the right, we can have the exact same width as far as the cabinet goes. Same on the bottom. And this one was really tricky because it was kind of a corner cabinet. Since there's this huge amount of space behind here, so we really wanted to take advantage of that with using the Lazy Susan thing. And what I did here, usually when you get these, there's this metal rod in the middle, which can be very annoying. Or there's this thing that comes out. Like there's all kinds of different versions of this. But the version that we went with was kind of just one that sits on a shelf, and it's like a rotating shelf. So I really like this specific design. We ordered this from a kitchen supply company and just fit it in there, and it fits perfectly.
Yeah, it looks beautiful. It's very sleek and very economical as far as space goes.
So using the computer software, I was able to figure out the exact width for, these cabinets on the side to make sure that everything fits properly. Another thing I was able to do is like figure out the exact width of the tile and the grout to be able to make sure that our tiles that we got would fit perfectly between the two cabinets here. So you can see there's a full tile here and another full tile there. And then if we laid one of the tiles horizontal, we were able to make the height work as well over here. Mm-hmm. Now it's never perfect. You could see that like it's theoretically sticking up a little bit, maybe like 1/8 of an inch. So
well, I was even saying, it would be ideal that if the tile were the same width as like the wood on the back.
The wainscoting?
The wainscoting, but you can't. It's impossible. They're made by different places. You can't.
Yeah, well, that you don't necessarily see. Well, maybe if you stand back far enough, you would see that. But then that was basically the design aspect of it, and then
you photoshopped it all.
Well, yeah, we photoshopped it to make sure that the color works. So one thing I figured out quite quickly is that we had this stove that was kind of this like
oatmeal color.
Oatmeal color, yeah.
Yeah.
And if I had made the cabinet green as well, it would have looked really weird. It would have just been this kind of a weird thing that sticks out of this green cabinet. So I decided to get the same matching color paint and use different paint on this cabinet, so you get like more of a rectangular block.
Oh yeah, you almost like can't even tell that this is not the stove. That's the cabinet.
This is the cabinet. Yeah. So there's like an intake vent here because we have an induction cooktop, and the induction cooktop gets really hot and it needs cooling, proper cooling. So they recommend you to get this ventilation channel here, and then they have ventilation channels on the side where the hot air can kind of escape. Now, one thing about all these appliances, which is really great, is that in their manuals, they provide all the measurements of the actual device. So then I know exactly that this thing is gonna fit if I make a cabinet for it. And you get all the spacing correctly, because there needs to be a certain amount of space between the oven and the cooktop so that there's enough airflow there so things don't heat up and catch fire. Now the same thing, I wanted to continue the color down here to the cabinets above, which is actually the hood range. So what I did is I built this hood range out of plywood, then I put drywall on it, and then I put a plaster layer of micro cement on it. So this is actually cement, and it has a sealer on it so that no moisture can mess with it. And then on the bottom here, we got a hood vent, and we just put that in here and put all the ductwork inside, and that goes through the ceiling and then out on the other side of the building. And the width of this, so the only thing, I measured everything as much as I could, and then this cabinet here, I left it long on the right side, because as I installed this, I started in the corner, kind of working my way that way, and then working my way this way, and then going next with this cabinet, and then put this thing in, and then whatever space I had left, I would cut that cabinet to size and then put it in there, and that resulted in having a kitchen that fits exactly in the space that we have.
Well, I would like to know,
custom.
because this is your first, like, you've done carpentry before, but this is your first cabinet project, and I don't even think you could have imagined doing this 2 years ago. So what was that process like?
It's great. It took a lot of time because it's the first time I'm making a kitchen like this, but a lot of it makes sense. There's so many good tutorials on YouTube about how to make cabinets and how to paint it. So there's just like, most of this was learned like from the internet. And another benefit that we had is that we have a kitchen fabrication shop on the corner of our street here, a guy named Blue, and he was very helpful as well in kind of walking me through how I would build something like this. And a lot of it is, like, I have to say, a lot of it is actually just really common sense. Like, there's so many good tricks that you could pick up on the internet, and together with just like thinking through it's just a lot of common sense.
But
and
things like this, where you have to leave a little bit more space so it doesn't hit this, like, I feel like those are afterthoughts.
Those are definitely little things that you could, if you've never done this before, those would trip you up. I'm trying to think of things that tripped me up. Like, it's probably just like...
Well, the Lazy Susan, the door for the Lazy Susan, I think was a little bit more
That
complex.
was very tricky.
Yeah.
Another thing that was tricky is like, okay, so I built this cabinet for the sink, but then, there's gotta get, like, I gotta feed hoses through that in the back.
Right.
So what do I do? Like, how do I make the sink sit in here so that it, like, fits exactly underneath this counter?
And cutting the counter even.
Cutting the counter was also something really difficult. So the way that we cut the countertop is we ordered this butcher block from a company in Pennsylvania, and it came just like cherry glued together. And then
Diaz Manufacturing, by the way, for anybody in the area.
Great company. And then what we did is we got the same stain that they used on the kitchen table here, which got done by another furniture company.
Hunt Country Furniture in upstate New York, for those interested. And we couldn't find a matching stain, like their stain.
We tried to match the stain because they're a little bit, they don't want to just give you their stain. They'll sell it to you for a lot of money. So luckily we didn't need much of it, but we wanted to make sure that it somewhat matched.
Yeah.
And that's what we eventually got. We just, bought that stain, and then we finished it with Odie's oil, because what's nice is that we could just keep applying Odie's oil to this over time as it kind of just ages. So the maintenance of it becomes a lot easier too. You just take everything off. You could lift this right out. It's not even attached. That's kind of how it's...
And turn it on.
That's kind of how it's like supposed to be. So yeah, the way I cut these holes is by using a router. So I made a template first that is a little bit of an edge away from the actual opening, and then you run your router across it multiple times, going deeper and deeper with the router bit, and then you slowly cut out this opening, and then luckily it fitted exactly like the opening of the fridge. And this is tricky usually with wood being so close to water. You don't want this to start rotting. So what's very important to us is that we actually also finished the bottom of this kitchen counter, so that if water ever gets underneath here and starts traveling on the bottom, it doesn't start rotting away or soaking into that wood. Another thing we have is a bead of silicone or caulk over here that prevents water from getting in. So it's going to be good to keep a close eye on that to see if that's still holding up.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, when you're going with a butcher block and you're not going with like a sealed marble or granite or anything like that, it just you know, you have to maintain it a bit more. And like you said, we were using Odie's oil, which is a nice natural
Yeah, it's like
oil.
a wax or something. So part of the cool thing about doing a kitchen myself is that I get to design it the way I want. And I really like cutting vegetables. Like cutting with a knife is something very satisfying. So I knew that we need to have a good cutting station here. Out of the leftovers of this butcher block, I actually made a cutting board, which is also, there's plenty of tutorials on the internet on how to do that. So this is an end grain cutting board. And I kept it pretty simple by just offsetting these. The reason I offset them is because it's very hard to make these little lines horizontally line up. So turned out great. I put little rubber feet on it so it's not just, you know, sitting against the other wood. And then the trick here is that once you're ready to cut something, you pull the cutting board forward like this, and that reveals 2 bins on the other side. So if I move these spoons over, and you got your knives. So what you could do is you could start cutting, and then all your leftovers would quickly fill up your cutting board. So what you can do is you can take your knife and put them over here in this bin, and that will be compost. Or you could have a bin for something else like trash.
Or 2 compost bins.
Or 2 compost bins. Once they're full, what you could do is you could pull this out, because it's a hidden drawer right here. So we use the little knobs as a little drawer pull. And then I can open this up, take this out, throw it in the compost. And this is actually a really easy way to deal with compost. What we like to do here is we keep a small bin for compost so it doesn't start to really rot and smell. Then I actually put it in the freezer if there's like more space in there. This freezer is actually almost just as small as this, so it doesn't really matter. It'd probably be best to just take it right outside.
Yeah, we actually have to get a little compost station out here. We have one for the common house, but not really for the Meadow House.
So then once you're cutting here, another feature is now you have, like, say you're cutting onions or whatever, you're cutting carrots, and you're done with that and you want to cut something else. Well, you have to put it somewhere. So this here is also a trash bin. So say you have more trash even, you could also scrape it this way and make it drop in the trash here.
Yeah, we have recycling,
or recycling
and trash. Yeah.
The other thing is that there was extra space here, so what I did is I built in another drawer here that opens up 2 more bins that you can then scrape your finished cutting material in.
That you want to cook with.
Yeah, that you want to cook with, and then you can take this out and put it over here and start cooking with it. The only issue here is that we might have to get slightly different bins because this is a little tight, the way this fits.
Well, we had a small one that we had there.
It doesn't matter. The concept is there as far as, like, you could put anything in here, even just a bowl.
Yeah.
Like this, and just set it down there and scrape it in there. But I really enjoy that. There's not a lot of room in this kitchen, but this is really just like the cutting station here where you could really, you know, get to work on cutting it. And then when you're done, you can move this back over here. It kind of hides the compost. Since there's a gap here, it provides some airflow, so it's not just like sitting there and completely closed off.
Yeah, and we cook a lot, and when you're working with like a very small space, and obviously we have a lot of stuff on here already, it's very handy to have this kind of multifunctional unit that he put in. And we did something similar in Brooklyn, actually, when I was living there, and I had him come over and actually do some changes to the cutting
Well, you had
board.
a very shitty kitchen in your Brooklyn apartment, so, you know, it was kind of like getting into carpentry a little more. It's like trying to figure out how to make that more efficient. So then another thing we did here is, so let's talk about the tile.
Oh, yeah.
The tiles, they're actually, I was able to make them go around the corner here. which took a couple tries of how to cut it properly, but I really love how that turned out. Another thing we have here is the windowsills are all made of old barn wood, so you have all this nice detail, and we just finished it off with a layer of shellac.
Now, do you want to talk about the tile a little bit more? So this is actually a handmade tile that we got from Zellage in Japan, and we wanted something that was not so shiny. We liked the idea of having a matte house, but then we painted the grout lines and everything. So
yeah, that's true. So this is the first time I actually did tile, and we used more like glue versus a grout because you could get away with that when your tiles don't get as wet. Since they're in the kitchen. So we just glued them in, and then the grout, it's actually very hard to find like a grout that's the same color as your tile. So what I end up doing is just getting some of the paint and just painting all the grout lines. And you actually did the first pass, I think.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So it was a little tedious, but it looks a lot better. So we just got dark gray grout and just painted it, and I think it takes paint really well because it's almost just like brick. It's very porous, and the paint would just disappear in there. So I think it's a fine technique to use. I couldn't really find anything online about painting grout, but it's kind of like brick, so you could paint brick and that would work. And it's a latex paint, so essentially it should seal the grout too, because then if water does splash on it, it shouldn't be able to get in because now it's painted. So who knows? It might be a better product in the end than just leaving it grout.
Now, one of the things that Sander didn't design in here, but we did paint, was the pantry, and that really...
Yeah, so this was helpful because Lee actually designed and made some of the furniture in this house. And he also did this pantry because we really liked the look of it. He's got that little arch going here in the top, which the arch is another little detail that I think is worth highlighting. I tried to bring that back in the way this range hood curves. And I also tried to bring it back in the way this curves here underneath the banquette seating so that you have a little bit of more leg space. But this piece was really helpful because it kind of established what the kitchen should look like. I had like a live demo piece of like, well, how do these cabinet doors work? How are they put together? Like, what's the space? How much is, like, what's the width on this? How much gap do we have? Like,
what
things
kind of
like
hinges
that.
to use?
What kind of hinges? So this was really helpful to have here. It wasn't finished, but it was just helpful to have as a
reference.
Just a reference for building the rest of this kitchen. Now, one thing that's a difference here so for example, this door has actual panels in it. These are cedar panels, tongue and groove, that can kind of like slide around and expand and contract a little bit in here if they want. So that's one way to do it. For this, I actually ended up doing something different because you see how on the left and on the right, we have an exact same width as far as the boards go or the panels. Same here, there's just a groove in the middle and it keeps it very like modern and calm. There's not like a groove right here on the edge. In order to do that, I kind of needed a custom spacing for almost each door, although they are they're almost the same width. But this is actually just a groove in an MDF board. So it looks like a panel, but it's actually a V groove that you can cut out with like the table saw. And that's you need a special kind of blade. And I was able to borrow that from our cabinet maker here on the street, so that was really helpful to have.
Now this is even different behind here in the cabinets, right? That looks even different.
Yeah, so then you have and the whole reason that we're going with these vertical lines is because we have this wainscoting in the rest of the place, and that introduced kind of the vertical lines to our design palette here. So we wanted to continue that into the kitchen, and that's why we have a lot of vertical lines. And then in the back here, we just have, I think it's just called beadboard or something.
Beadboard, yeah, that's what it's called.
It looks like wainscoting, but it's a thin panel, and it was just nice to use that in the back. And we ended up coloring it the same as the stove. We thought of staining it first, but then it would it wouldn't match because it was pine and it had a lot of different it looked just a little ugly.
Yeah,
and
stain
it wasn't
on
super
pine
high
doesn't
quality.
always work, yeah.
So
And actually, if we were to stain it, we were going to stain it this color, and we didn't think it would, like the sherry color, and we didn't think it would work with actually just a lot of the copper and stuff that we
yeah,
had
you have a
here.
lot of terracotta up there, would
Yeah.
disappear against the orange background. So then once the kitchen was done, we added some of our own little things. Like we made, so out of wood that we had left over, we built this little stand for
Oh yeah, I forgot about
this
that.
water,
Dispenser.
water dispenser thing. We built this little spice rack, which was fairly easy, although really tricky to glue up because it has these like metal rods that sink into this, so you have to like make sure it's all squeezed together, like level. And what else did we make here?
Well, the cutting board, which you already mentioned.
Yeah, the cutting board. But
And then, of course, you could talk about the banquette.
well, yeah. So kind of with the kitchen came this piece of furniture, which is the banquette. And it's just the best way to go about saving as much space as possible in this small like area here. So I reused, so we cut some sections of the wainscoting out because we had to create that door to the bathroom. So I had sections of this stuff. So I used it here to continue that same language on the side. I also used some of it here. And I don't know, there's just a lot of little details in here that are very satisfying. Like you could see that here the drawer is exactly 5 boards wide and it has the exact, like, you know, it's all centered. So here what I did is I used the wainscoting from the house, I used the baseboard from the house, and then I got my own like 1/4 inch plywood panel, and I just kind of bent it to form this shape. And then I built this whole seat here out of plywood. And then this is some of the leftover kitchen cabinet material. And then this again is also what you see on the top of the wainscoting. So that's kind of like matching the wainscoting now. It's almost like if the wainscoting extruded itself and became a seat.
Yeah.
So
But
then,
you that was painstaking to like think about these different curves and what materials we would use and everything.
yeah, the
And
curve was really tricky, and especially tricky because you could see there in the corner, that's where the curves come together.
yeah.
And that's just a mathematical headache to figure out how to make it work. But what's nice, what I've really learned with this carpentry stuff is you can always use a little piece of trim to hide things. And I kept just adding little pieces of trim to make it nicer. So here, this little round bit here, I added on later, and it really creates a really finished look here on
Yeah.
the top. But I initially didn't really have that. I just had like a square or something. But it also provides a little lip so this pillow doesn't want to come off the seat. So
Can you talk about painting everything? Because everything is so fluidly painted. You don't see brush
yeah,
strokes.
so one thing that I really knew from the start was that I needed to, in order to get a good finish, I need to have a paint sprayer. These things are called HVLP sprayers, and it's basically an air compressor that like atomizes paint as it comes out of like a hose. So it's a really thin stream of paint that's being squeezed out by the compressor. And then the compressor also introduces air into that stream, and it just creates this mist of paint. And that's able to like spray everything, and you get a really uniform look. You might have to add some water if you're spraying latex paint, because latex paint is quite thick, but then you just do more coats and it just kind of self-levels and it turns out beautiful. So if you get a good quality paint, then that would work really well. And yeah, the whole box is made of plywood. And one thing that I knew for sure is like, obviously there's a lot of space underneath here. So we wanted to make sure we took advantage of that. So I did built in this storage compartment down here. And what you can see here is that it's a piano hinge. So it's really easy to hinge. And then I routed in a little gap for these. And then you can open this up. And I wanted to make sure that the bottom here also looked beautiful, so that when you do open this up, you have a lot of space and it looks beautiful. So one thing that I was trying really hard to make sure I did was that usually, like, you want to make sure that when you sit on this, it's supported quite well. So I wanted to build this in a way where there was no cross braces here for support. So I used the thick 3/4 inch plywood here to make sure that we didn't need anything over this 12-inch span here.
Why does this plywood look really fancy?
Because this was the plywood that we used. It is a
Wow.
veneered plywood.
It's nice.
And it's maple. And maple is really nice because it paints really well. Same like poplar. But this is just a finish coat on there. And I left it just maple because it's really nice looking. And this is just like a foot of space. And that's just the floor that you see. And then it's all continuous all throughout. So I really like that detail. And then we have another one of those on that side.
Right,
And
exactly.
then we got these custom pillows made here in the local area.
Yeah, so she's, what is her
Ithaca
name?
Upholstery.
Ithaca Upholstery, yeah. So if
And yeah,
anybody's
they
in the
made
area.
this and it fits perfect. So
And we chose like a firm cushion and, and we got the same fabric that we got in the couch outside too, so that there's just some symmetry there.
yeah, and then we picked up all this cool stuff from the auction and I actually took it apart and painted it the same color as the kitchen.
This was already actually stained, this kind of cherry
Yeah,
stain,
so I left
though.
a stain because
Yeah.
then, that was fine. Same for this little bench. It's a great stable bench.
Oh, yeah.
And these were all little things that, when I'm starting out doing this, it's just really good to see how other people make furniture and how they approach it. This one's specifically very nicely built. You can see that these are like cut out. They have these buttons to hide the screws. There's this nice arch in here as well. And the steps here have a bit more of a round corner on the bottom than on
Yeah.
the top. So I just really appreciated how this was built, and it kind of helped me figure out how the rest of the kitchen looks as
It
well.
almost looks like a butcher block in a way.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
You can also see that these are, kind of the same as the way that the kitchen works here with these edges.
Yeah.
So I really like this, and we just make sure to put little feet on it so that it doesn't scratch the floor. So we really love getting stuff from the auction, upgrading it, and then making it look brand new. It's a really economical way to get good furniture going. And yeah, what else you want to know about the kitchen?
Well, I think that's a pretty good overview. So if you guys want to see more of the overall tour of the house, then you could tune into that video, but we wanted to give a much more detailed overview of how this kitchen came together from something that was so drab and boring to something that feels very much like a home.